fascinating story, your own. But let's first talk about what has happened to Jill Abramson and your assessment of what has taken place.
Well, first of all, Jill was a towering figure and has been for a long time in the journalism business. She's an excellent reporter. She's done tough stories. She's a fabulous investigative reporter. She ran a great Washington bureau of the New York Times. And of course, for those of us in the media, her appointment was significant. That a woman would be able to be the editor of the New York Times was extraordinary. And so this is really a sad and very upsetting ending to her reign. You know, I think the problems with Jill, as we've learned now from the New Yorker piece, is that she has been consistently underpaid in the previous positions that she had as well. It's not clear what the total compensation issue was with Jill, so we're not exactly sure how that did compare. But I think it shows how upset she was that, at least according to Ken Auletta's piece, she actually brought in a lawyer to talk about her salary and her compensation. And I think what resonates is that women are consistently underpaid in every single field. We know that well. And we know that even at the top. When Mary Barra became CEO of GM, she also was underpaid.
And in terms of her impact in the short period that she was executive editor, could you talk about what happened under her regime there? Well,
she seemed to have, from the outside, enormous success. I mean, she won 8 Pulitzers in the course of her reign. There were some issues where she appointed some people who didn't work out. Fine. There were certainly talks about her personality. There's often people say about women, you know, they're judged on their personality and men are judged on the outcomes. That's also been consistently true when you talk about women, especially in top management. You know, I think it's also a question of managing up. Some people can be difficult, but they manage up well. Other people may have more difficult relationships with their bosses.
I want to go to Jill Abramson's legacy at the New York Times. First, this is a clip of Jill Abramson speaking to CBS News just a few weeks after she was appointed executive editor in 2012.
It would be nice to think we would get to the point where it wasn't so remarkable when a woman rose to the top job at an important institution. But I think, you know, we aren't there yet.
As of this Wednesday, the New York Times masthead no longer lists Jill Abramson as executive editor, but it does list many of the women she appointed during her tenure. In 2013 alone, she made Carolyn Ryan the Washington bureau chief, Allison Mitchell the national editor. She also made Pamela Paul head of the Sunday Book Review. In addition, Abramson created a race and ethnicity beat at the paper, covered by national correspondent Tanzina Vega, and she appointed Margaret Sullivan as public editor, the first woman to hold the position at the paper. It's also worth noting that the New York Times opinion page, which is outside the executive editor's purview, has a 10-to-2 ratio of male to female columnists. Lynn Povich.
Well, it is true, and we know this, that when women run something, they tend to appoint other women. And certainly Jill did that with bringing so many women into the management positions. I just want to say that actually the appointment of Margaret Sullivan is the publisher's appointment. It is not the editor's appointment. So Arthur Sulzberger was responsible for Margaret Sullivan's appointment. But Jill put many, many women in top positions and was a role model for the younger women and all women at the New York Times. And I think we know how upset they are to see the way in which she was dismissed.
Can you look back in terms of your struggles within the industry when women begin to raise these issues in the newsroom with management, the reaction, what happens to those who speak out?
Well, you know, there are those people who have supported women. There are always allies among the men. And then it's also true that many men in management feel that women aren't as qualified. They're getting ahead because of affirmative action. They're against that. And that does create tension among your colleagues. And so therefore, women are always scrutinized in their management abilities, you know, how they manage, because so much stigma is attached to being more assertive, being aggressive, being what is called pushy. And women, unfortunately, have to learn how to navigate those waters well. And men don't.
Interesting you should mention pushy, because although they have a non-disparagement agreement, I guess, Jill Abramson in the Times, her daughter, Jill Abramson's daughter, tweeted out a picture of her mother. And it's a picture of Jill Abramson boxing. And under it, it says pushy. Well, I want to turn to Jill Abramson speaking at Columbia University in January on a panel about journalism after Edward Snowden. She noted during the Obama administration there's been 7 criminal leak investigations, more than twice the number of any previous administration.
This seems to be, if not a stated policy, a reality where journalism about sensitive national security issues that I see as vitally in the public interest is effectively being criminalized, and a real freeze is setting in what had been to this point I think a healthy discourse between sources and journalists. And I might here cite, if I can take just a minute, sure, because the gentleman had quite a long bit of time to speak, is to point out that Max Frankel, in a very famous affidavit in the Pentagon Papers case, wrote eloquently about how the public does benefit from this discourse. And I have seen both in the job as Washington bureau chief of the Times, certainly then growing as managing editor and now as executive editor, that these criminal leak investigations have had a very profound effect on journalism.
That was Jill Abramson speaking in January when she was still executive editor of the New York Times. Sitting next to her was Janine Gibson, editor-in-chief of Guardian U.S. The New York Times has reported Abramson had made a job offer to Gibson to be a co-managing editor position at the New York Times with Dean Baquet. But apparently Janine Gibson turned that down. The significance of her battle in the context of what you've gone through, Lynn Povich. We don't have much time, but yours is a fascinating history. What happened at Newsweek and the struggles you see with women. Briefly encapsulate that for us.
Well, we, as was said, we were not even allowed to be promoted out of a category. And so we did have to file a legal complaint with the Equal Employment Opportunities Commission.
There were no women reporters at Newsweek.
There were a few women who had gotten out of the category as reporters. I had actually been promoted as a junior writer, the only woman writing at the time. And so our lawsuit, our legal complaint, was about how we were treated and discriminated against as women, since men with equal credentials coming out of the same kinds of colleges were immediately hired as reporters and writers. We actually had, our lawyer was Eleanor Holmes Norton. We actually had to file a second time. And our second lawyer, Harriet Rabb, was actually hired by the New York Times women when they filed their suit in 1974. We didn't actually ask for money. We should have, but we were just wanted to get out of the category. And it's unusual that I, as one of the ringleaders of the suit, benefited by becoming the first woman senior editor. Most women on the front lines of these lawsuits did not benefit. Betsy Wade, the lead plaintiff of the New York Times, who was on the foreign desk, ended up becoming a travel writer. And she said to me, Lynn, we did a brave thing, but we knew it would be for the next generation. Now, enormous progress has been made for women in journalism. We see them covering wars now when they weren't allowed to. We see them covering the president when they were only covering the first lady. And we see breakthroughs like Jill Abramson, the head of NBC News, is a woman. I mean, we've begun to see a few cracked ceilings at the top, but certainly not enough.
And you certainly didn't expect that 2 generations later you'd still be dealing with the issue of equal pay for equal work.
Exactly. And everywhere, equal pay for equal work. That is why, you know, in Congress, this law has been languishing there, and the president has certainly tried to do something as much as he can with executive orders.
And what happened after your lawsuit at Newsweek? Now, talk about the day that your lawsuit came out. I mean, that's pretty astounding.
We had been organizing to file a complaint, and when we heard that Newsweek was going to do a cover story on the women's movement. And because there were no experienced women writers at Newsweek at the time, they went outside the magazine for the first time in 37-year history and hired a wonderful writer at the New York Post, Helen Dudar, to come and freelance the piece. And we thought, aha,
Women in revolt.
we have a news peg for our lawsuit. And so the day that the cover appeared, we announced that 46 of us were suing Newsweek for sex discrimination, mainly because we knew the publicity would get these liberal editors of Newsweek who were against the war in Vietnam and for civil rights to suddenly realize, oh my goodness. And the editor-in-chief, Osborne Elliott, said to me later, we knew that Monday that this was right, that the women, of course the women were right. Underneath our noses, we had been oppressing this whole class.
And the newspapers that went following your lead, the women in those papers.
Yes, I mean, women at the AP, at NBC, at the New Haven Register, at the New York Times, at Newsday, and many other organizations, women started organizing and either filed complaints or talked to their management. And the Washington Post.
And the women today, how aware are they of the battles that occurred back then in the newsroom?
It's very interesting. I interviewed some young women who were working at Newsweek in 2010. They knew nothing about the lawsuit. There's not a stick of evidence at Newsweek, and in many organizations, because their morgues have all been sold. And so when they found out about it, they were amazed that 40 years earlier, there had been a group of women dealing with some of the same issues they were dealing with still.